Welcome and thank you for joining us for this AGRO Lunch and Learn webinar. This webinar series is only possible through the generous support from European Agroscience Services. So thank you very much for their continuing sponsorship. My name is Natalia Peranginangin. I am a senior environmental fate modeler and risk assessor at Syngenta. I will be serving as a moderator for today's webinar. Everyone that is signed in will be on auto mute and can ask questions by using Q&A button at the bottom and type in your questions anytime during the course of the webinar. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentations. So hopefully we have enough time to get through all of them. I'll take a moment to highlight the benefits of becoming an AGRO member. AGRO pays numerous benefits by enhancing your science, building your scientific network, and supporting your professional development. So please go to the AGRO website at agrodiv.org and click on Become a Member. The cost is less than $20 a year, and you don't have to be a member of the American Chemical Society to join as an affiliate member. I would also like to inform that the next AGRO program will be on August 21st to 25th in Chicago. Session proposals are now being accepted electronically via website, and the link is on the AGRO website. If you would like to get more information, you can contact Heidi Eric at the email address listed here. More webinars will be coming this year. Ralph Noen will be up next on October the 13th. He will be presenting Let's Go Molecular, Bee Pollinator Toxicogenomics meets Pesticide Risk Assessment. So this will be another fantastic webinar. You can register on the AGRO website. We'll also receive an email with the registration link sometime after this webinar. So we have quite a busy agenda today. We will start with Dana Vogel from the US EPA, who will present EPA's history over the last 50 years, followed by the Q&A. Then we will have presentations from some AGRO key members. Sherry Cleveland and Amy Ritter will present the AGRO's 50s history and anniversary timeline, followed by a short update from Ken Reck on AGRO 50 and beyond celebration. Then we will close with the question and answer. So now I'm honored to introduce our first speaker, Dana Vogel. Dana Vogel has been the permanent director of the Health Effect Division, or HED, since August 16, 2015. Ms. Vogel joined the agency in 1998 and began her career in HED as an occupational and residential exposure and risk assessor. As a senior scientist in HED, Dana contributed to many high-profile scientific reviews, such as the NMC and OP cumulative risk assessments. Dana also served as branch chief and deputy division director before becoming the director of HED. Dana possesses a vast knowledge and understanding of the risk assessment process and is recognized across the agency as an expert in probabilistic exposure and risk assessment techniques. Ms. Vogel holds a degree in chemistry from Villanova University. And on that note, Dana, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, welcome everyone, and thanks for taking your lunch hour to participate in this brown bag lunch session. Just one little point of clarification before we get started. So I know my title is a little bit deceiving, but we won't be talking today about my 50 years at EPA. I haven't been there almost maybe half that time about. So what we'll be talking about today is the history. You all probably realized that in 2020, the agency celebrated its 50-year anniversary. And my talk today is going to focus on the history, some of the legislative basis, and the accomplishments of the Office of Pesticide Programs, or as we like to call it, OPP, over those 50 years. So with that, I'm going to get started so that we have time for questions at the end. So where did we begin? Pesticide Regulation, first Pesticide Control Act was enacted in 1910. That was mainly focused on making sure products were effective and that labels were effective. In 1947, FIFRA, or as we refer to it, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, was passed, and at that point was under the jurisdiction of USDA. And again, was pretty much at that point focused on the efficacy of pesticides, not as much on the regulation of pesticide use. Okay, so in 1970, EPA was established with the mission to protect human health and the environment. As you're probably all aware, the agency is headed by an administrator and is also led by assistant administrators at the head of each office. And OPP is a part of what is now known as the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. So this slide, and I know you can't probably see the top of it, but if you can, these are our applicable statutes. And so what I'd like to do now, this is a visual that kind of goes through all the different acts that kind of govern and are really the basis for the work that we do on OPP. We're going to talk a little bit about each one of these, and this is just a visual to demonstrate how they all kind of fit together. So I'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so starting with FIFRA. FIFRA was essentially rewritten, as I mentioned before, originally written in 47, rewritten in 1972. And at this point, EPA was given authority to regulate pesticides. FIFRA in its current state allows us to regulate the sale and use of pesticides, making sure to protect human health and preserve the environment. And a little bit more on FIFRA here. So what I did here is the first part of this slide, the first bullet. You're all probably somewhat familiar with this. We register pesticides if, when used according to the label, we've determined that they generally do not cause they will not cause unreasonable adverse effects on human health or the environment. FIFRA is a risk-benefit statute, which means that actions that fall under FIFRA, we will be evaluating them both for their risk as well as the benefits. And FIFRA also allows and governs registration of pesticides, our registration review program, worker protection, and ecological risks. Okay. Another important act that governs a lot of what we do is FFDCA, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And as you see on this slide, before we can register a pesticide that's used on a food or animal feed item, we must either determine that we can grant a tolerance or an exemption from tolerance. We establish a tolerance if there is a reasonable certainty that there is no harm that will result from the use as labeled. And for those of you who want to know a little bit more about what is a tolerance is the maximum legally allowable pesticide residue that's allowed on food. And it really is an enforcement tool to detect misuse. It's also used as a trade standard that's very important to international commerce. Okay, FQPA. So the Food Quality Protection Act amended and changed a little bit the work that we did up until its passage. So at this point, the agency was required to do aggregate exposure assessments and cumulative risk assessments. So aggregate being making sure that multiple pathways of a given pesticide wouldn't cause an unreasonable risk, and then as well as evaluate cumulative risk for classes of pesticides that share a common mode of action. Another very important part of FQPA was the addition of safety factors to be required to ensure the protection of children. It also authorized us for our registration review program, which is our reevaluation program that we're currently in, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. It also directed us to assess endocrine disruption and emphasizes an open and transparent public process. Okay, PREA. So the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act was first passed in 2004, has been reauthorized several times since then. It is a fee-for-service act, although it does not fully fund the cost of registration for the agency. When PREA was passed, this was the first time where we had created timeframes for completion of registration. So not only are fees collected, but there's an associated timeframe for when each of those actions is to be completed. So this changed a little bit the work that we have done, because previous to PREA, the agency determined the work plan in the field of registration actions, be that registration of new active ingredients or new uses of existing active ingredients. So definitely changed the work and the way we did it, especially under the registration program specifically. Okay. So now I'm going to shift a little bit, and I'm going to go over some of our accomplishments of focusing a little bit more on the more recent and highlighting them. Not to say that these are the only achievements we have, but I'm going to highlight some under our registration program, as well as some accomplishments we've had under our re-registration program, and then move on to innovation and some other emerging science achievements that we've had. Okay, so under the registration program, so EPA reviews every new pesticide and every new use. So before a new pesticide can be registered or a new use of an existing pesticide can be registered, the agency does a significant and substantial evaluation. We require hundreds of different studies to make those determinations, and we evaluate those studies. And there is, as listed on this slide, a special emphasis on children's health. We know that this program is very important to making sure that there are tools in the toolbox for growers. And on this slide, as you can see, I've also highlighted, just as an example, here are some of the accomplishments that we had in 2020 under the registration program. 16 new active ingredients, many of which were reduced risk pesticides, as well as granting of over 160 new uses of existing pesticides. Next slide. All right. Okay. So some of our regulatory achievements related to our reevaluation program. So prior to where we are now, which is in a registration review status, prior to registration review, EPA had accomplishments under re-registration. So as you see on this slide, in 2008, we completed a review of older pesticides that were registered before November 1 of 1984 to make sure that they met our current scientific and regulatory standards. We reviewed a lot of data to come up with those evaluations that were summarized in the reds, and the agency developed mitigation measures to reduce potential and identified risks as a result of those risk assessments. As I mentioned previously, those decisions are summarized in the reds, and the agency continues to implement some of those decisions. Along the same period of time, we also reassessed existing tolerances to make sure that they met our safety standard by FQPA. So within 10 years, we were to reassess all existing tolerances and exemptions to make sure that they met the reasonable certainty of no harm standard. So we completed about 99% of those by August 3rd of 2006, and the remaining 84 were reassessed after we completed the cumulative risk assessment for the carbamate class of chemicals. And so the point here being, as we reevaluate, and one of the most important principles of our reevaluation program is to make sure that our assessments are standing up to the most recent up-to-date science. So we want to make sure that we're doing our reevaluation considering all the relevant, and as science evolves, that we're taking the evolution of science into consideration to make sure that our risk assessments are up to date with the most recent science. That is also the case for registration review, which is currently the cycle that we're in. Under registration review and under FIFRA, we're required to re-review registered pesticides on a 15-year cycle. And again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the program is intended to make sure that as risk evolves, as science evolves, as our policies and practices change, that we're still able to meet our statutory obligation of no unreasonable adverse effects. And as usual, we are always striving to use the best available science. Knowing that science evolves, we're do our very best to keep abreast of the most current science and use it in our assessments. In 2020, for example, EPA published approximately 100 draft risk assessments or eco assessments, 95 proposed interim decisions, and 99 final decisions under registration review. My next slide, which that's a little bit of a strange transition, I apologize for that. I wanted to highlight, okay, let's go back. I wanted to highlight our overall registration review status and some of the accomplishments. So on this slide, you can see how many draft risk assessments overall we've completed during registration review, how many interim decisions, final decisions, as well as wanted to highlight here for you that about 70% of the decisions that were made required mitigation. So a significant amount of work goes into not just our science assessments, risk assessments, benefit assessments, but on the risk management side to make sure that the appropriate mitigation is done. So 70% of the decisions required mitigation. That's a lot of work for the risk managers. And also highlighting that registration review thus far, approximately 26 conventional chemicals have been canceled during this process. Okay, so I wanted to take a moment and also talk about worker safety and a lot of the different initiatives and kind of history on worker safety. So I'm going to highlight for you here I think it was 1992. Yeah, it was 1992. The Worker Protection Standard was passed to ensure that pesticide use, that workers are adequately protected from pesticide use. It was modified again in 2015. And the changes here reflect current research and on how to mitigate occupational pesticide exposure to ag workers as well as pesticide handlers and strengthen the protection for ag workers and handlers under WPS. So the agency does and OPP does, there's a significant history here of working and making sure we understand worker safety and that our assessments as well as Worker Protection Standard have addressed worker safety concerns. So starting prior to a lot of the work that we did was in the 1980s and the 1990s with development of guideline data, with being able to finally evolve to a place where there was a methodology where we could start to do worker risk assessments. And that really formed and framed around the same time, the first WPS. So over the years, to get to the point we are now, there's been a significant history, not just in the 1980s and 90s where we kind of started our work on worker protection, but over the years with working with different task force, a significant amount of data being generated really has gotten us to where we are with our assessment approaches as well as the Worker Protection Standard and what it reflects. So I just wanted to highlight a little bit of that. Significant amount of research has gone in, data development, methodology development, and it's an important accomplishment for OPP. Okay, so ESA. So on this slide, you're going to see some of the general pieces of ESA. And our goal here is to carry out EPA's responsibility under FIFRA in compliance with ESA without placing unnecessary burden on agriculture or other pesticide users. For EPA, that means that we ensure that when we registered pesticides, we're not likely to jeopardize listed species or destroy or adversely modify their critical habitat. As you may know, there's a lot of ongoing work in this area. EPA is refining its methods for assessing pesticide risks to endangered and threatened species in their habitat and is collaborating with the services on this complex issue to create a sustainable process for reviewing a given pesticide's effect on endangered and threatened species with a real eye toward making the process effective, sustainable, and early engagement of stakeholders. Okay, so this is a more recent accomplishment, but I thought it was important given our current COVID status to highlight some of the work that the Antimicrobials Division has done with respect to COVID-19. So as you can see on this slide, a significant amount of work goes into reviewing product claims, listing products to be used, with COVID claims, processing, submissions, responding to congressionals, pre-registration meetings. So a lot of work has been done and continues to be done within the agency. There was a bit of a shift, as you're probably aware, from when the CDC gave the information to everyone that it was more of an airborne concern than anything else. We've shifted our work to align with that. So the focus is less now on the surface contact, disinfecting products. It's more on the airborne products at this point. Okay, so I'm going to move on to some of the innovations and the evolution of science. So the Office of Pesticide Programs has been and continues to be a leader in new approach methodologies, or NAMs as we call them. On this slide, I have highlighted for you, there's a link here to our current work plan on NAMs and reduced animal testing. I've also listed here the conferences that we've had on NAMs, as well as there's another conference to be held in 2020. So a lot of work goes into NAMs. As you can see to the right of your slide, it's the different steps in the process. As I've mentioned before, OPP is pretty focused on looking at NAMs and figuring out how to use, whether it's PBPK models or in vitro data, how this kind of information can be used in the context of our risk assessments. I apologize for the dinging. International collaboration. The EPA also and Office of Pesticide Programs have a strong history of international collaboration. We participate, as you can see, in a lot of different efforts as listed on this slide. PIC, POP, OECD, the whole alphabet soup here. A lot of discussions focused on not only tolerance harmonization, but making sure that we're communicating, collaborating on emerging science and our kind of opinions and approaches on those to make sure as much as possible that we are aligned with the most up-to-date science and sharing that with other parts of the world. Innovation. Okay, so another thing I previously mentioned, so we're also committed to innovation. As I mentioned before, the registration program is important to make sure we have tools in the toolbox. And many times they're important tools in the toolbox to address emerging pest challenges and can be used to replace older and often higher risk pesticides. We're also committed to our biopesticides programs to provide and encourage the development of lower risk biopesticides as alternatives to conventionals. And we are also working closely with the USDA on herbicides resistance issues within the US. Okay, so I talked a lot about our history here, and I thought it was worth noting at the end some ongoing efforts within the agency right now. In addition to everything else that I've mentioned, there is, with the executive orders from President Biden, there is an increased emphasis on environmental justice, and we are working and thinking right now about our work plan and how we could more fully implement environmental justice into our work. So a lot of work going internally. We're definitely focused still on implementation of NAMs where appropriate, staying abreast of the current and being kind of leaders in the most credible and sustainable science. And there's also, as you may have realized, and many of you may have benefited from, an increased emphasis on stakeholder engagement. So these are just some additional things I wanted to mention that are important to this administration and the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention overall. And that is my last slide. So I will take any questions you have at this point.
Thank you so much, Dana. That's an excellent overview of the history and accomplishments. And also thanks for letting us know about the challenges and the ongoing efforts. So we have some questions, a couple of questions. And meanwhile, audience are free to type any questions they have in the Q&A button at the bottom. Yeah. The first question, you mentioned evolving science. Do you think the current trend of climate change and sustainability will change EPA's focus of science requirements or data to support agriculture?
I think it's a very good question. There are, and I probably should have put this on my slide too. Climate change is obviously another very important item that this administration wants to explore further and do more with. I don't have anything specific to share with you at this time, although there are I can let you know there are many discussions on how to incorporate climate change and think about that within the context of all that we do within OCSPP. So I would say likely more to come on that.
Thank you. The second question, since FIFRA is a risk safety process, what have you observed with the implementation of the reduced risk program? And do you anticipate any changes in EPA's approach in the future? Example, adding a sustainability component to the reduced risk criteria.
So that's a really good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer for it at this point in time. I don't know if there's going to be any changes to the program. Obviously, we as an agency always encourage packages that are reduced risk because we want to make sure, as we said, have the right tools in the toolbox. And if and when it's all possible to have alternatives we have lower risk alternatives, that's a very important to this administration, to OPP, it always has been. But I'm not aware at this point of any specific changes that are coming.
The next question, with the EPA's non-animal testing mandate by 2035, do you see this as being achievable? How do you think the general public and NGO stakeholders will respond?
So I flipped back. Can everyone see my slides? I flipped back to my NAM slide. So there was in June 2020, the work plan was revised a little bit. And so it's a little different than it was under the last administration. So I would encourage everyone, if you're interested, to follow this link, kind of see what is there and what the differences are. As far as, I think part of your question was, how is it perceived by external stakeholders, whether it was NGOs or other partners? I think we get a mixed response to NAMs, and I think our challenge as OPP is to kind of be very transparent in what we're looking at and why we're looking at it, and why we think, in the cases where we think this is the best available science and can be used within the context of our risk assessment. I think it's our job to make very clear why we think that is and to build confidence in the NAMs. It is an emerging science, but I think that's really our job, is to make sure that we're quite transparently communicating why we believe it's appropriate to use it when we're using it within the context of our risk assessments.
Thanks. Next question. Environmental advocacy groups frequently accuse EPA or PP of ignoring published literature and only relying on industry data. Please explain that this perception is a myth and how EPA incorporates an assessment of the literature into its risk analysis.
Sure. So you are correct. So when we're doing our risk assessments, we're looking at all available data. We do literature searches of the open literature. We look at incident data. We look at epidemiological data. We look at the data that is submitted, the animal data that's submitted. We really try to cast a wide net and make sure that we're looking at all lines of evidence and really create, that goes into the approach that we use with every chemical. And again, you don't always have all of those lines of evidence with every chemical, but when you do, we use each one of those lines of evidence and in a weight of evidence. So we're weighing all of the information that's available, and especially when, and you can see this a lot, we'll go a little deep, take much deeper dives on certain information when it's more critical to the determination of the risk, or it could have a regulatory impact. But yes, we do. It is 100% the case that we're looking at all lines of evidence and trying to cast a wide net so that we're not missing anything, and that our science assessments cover all different lines of evidence in that weight of evidence approach.
Thank you. What role did EPA play, if any, in the lawsuit against Monsanto on the Roundup use?
I don't really have a comment on that. To my knowledge, we're not playing I don't know what role we would have played in that. We're here to answer questions where it's appropriate, but I don't really have anything to add on the Monsanto lawsuit. It's not really something I'm dealing with because I don't think that it's really related specifically to the agency.
Thank you, Dana. Where are golf course pesticide applications covered at EPA? Were these included in the worker safety push?
Can you repeat the question? So is the question about golf course workers or golf course use?
Golf course use, golf course pesticide applications. So the question is,
okay.
Where are golf course pesticide applications covered at EPA? Where were these included in the worker safety push?
So I would say two different things. So those people that are applying as part of their jobs, pesticides on golf courses, we would do a worker assessment. We do a risk assessment for those workers applying those pesticides, and as well as anyone else that's going in after the pesticides are applied for any kind of cultivation or maintenance activities. In addition to that, when pesticides are used on golf courses and there is a potential for residential exposure, that would be also something we would assess residential exposure to. So for instance, golfers. So if a pesticide is applied, and we would be assessing after that application how a golfer might be exposed.
Thank you. There are still a couple of more questions, but due to the time, I will have one more. How has the consolidation of the agrochemical industry into just a few companies that still pursue new AIs affected your process? What about orphan crops or similar to orphan diseases in the pharma industry being addressed?
I'm not. So could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
Yeah. So the first question is, how has the consolidation of the agrochemical industry into just a few companies that still pursue new AIs affected your process? So there has been consolidation of a number of agrochemicals, and how this affect your process?
So from a health effects division standpoint, and others within OPP may have a different perspective, but for us, my division is really focused on doing the science assessments. I'm not sure that we've seen that much of an impact, but it may be different for some of the risk management divisions. And I wouldn't unfortunately be able to answer that question at this point.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dana. Thank you so much for this great presentation, and certainly a lot of interest from the audience. And I apologize for those questions that we are not able to answer due to the other topics that we would like to cover. So next is Cheryl Cleveland will be presenting about the AGRO 50th history and the anniversary timeline that grew out of the 50th AGRO celebration plans. So Cheryl, over to you.
Yes. So just to check, somebody seeing the screen correctly?
Perfect.
Okay. So yes, I have been asked to talk to you today from my position of when I served as your 2020 division chair for the AGRO division. And that was the year that we planned to have a great big set of celebration activities in San Francisco, and they did not happen because of the pandemic. But we've been celebrating our 50 years now for a couple of years, and some things are on hold. Ken will let you know about the things to come still in Chicago. But I'm going to be able to talk to you about one thing that did finish, and that's the project that we instigated, which is the Historical Timeline Project. I'm going to show you a couple of slides just to introduce it, and I'm going to use it to kill 3 birds with 1 stone. I'm going to be giving you an update on the timeline. I'm going to be giving you some agro history, and I also want to contrast that or show you how we built out of our history to things that happen today in our division. So I just have 2 introduction slides here. Let me see if I can make it go forward. So we had this timeline project that was just one of the many celebration activities, and it was supported by ACS IPG funding, which is an innovative project grant special for just this project. We had 2 versions. The first version happened last year, and it was part of our virtual celebration, but now we have an excellent second version that's completed, is up on our website. And it turned out that during a pandemic, this was actually a really good project that allowed us to have some coordination and some input from our memberships. Because what we were doing was we were building a historical timeline for that 50 years primarily, and we got input on these milestones collected from across our division membership. We had a small team that was kind of curating this information, made up of myself, Teresa, and Amy. And also Laura came in at the end and just really helped us step up our game to get to the final product that we have today. So it was really great to have her participation. Again, I'm just going to give you one more slide before we go out to the timeline. Trying to manage here. Here we go. So what we asked for people was 4 elements: a date, a milestone, an impact, and then what you'll see is inside of our timeline, we have a lot of times we have a web link or a reference that you can go to find more information. Now I'm going to take you to the timeline through the agrodiv.org homepage. But if you want to take a screenshot and you want to save this for later, you can also get there directly by typing in the \agro and timeline, and you can go there directly. And what you'll see is the timeline is also arranged in 5 large buckets for themes, really just for organization. So now what I want to do is pop out to the website. This is the agrodiv.org website. I'm on the homepage. And if I scroll down just ever so little, I hit a link here that says visit the agro timeline. And that is going to bring up the final product now. And you can see that we have collected our milestones organized again in 5 buckets. And one of them is agro history. So I'm going to drill down into the agro history for a while and show you some things that I think you can relate to, and you can see how some of our history evolved over these 50 years. The timeline runs backwards because we did get things that came in really early on, and so we just put them at the bottom. But the main content is running from 1970 to 2020. And if I go to 1970, you can see the reason we are celebrating our 50 years is because in 1970, that is when we got full divisional status from ACS to form the Division of Pesticides. The source for this is a document, and this is, again, highlighting the fact that when you're on this timeline, you can go out to the links. This is actually a publication about the history of the agrochemical division early on. It's in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry. This is the journal for our division. And it was published by one of our former chairs of the division. And so if I go back to the timeline, there was a little discussion about, well, should we be celebrating from 1969? Because this is when we actually had our first chair, who was Don Crosby. And we gave our first international award, who was John Cassida. But we decided we would celebrate from 1970 because this is when we had full divisional status. I want to pop back, though, to 1951, because this is when we really started to form as a nucleus. We were a subdivision within the Division of Agricultural and Food Chemistry. within ACS, and we still have ties with them today. We have a lot of members who are members of both divisions, and we do a lot of co-sponsorship work with ag and food chemistry. Now, I want to move forward and highlight a few firsts for us. And again, I hope I'm also demonstrating the way the timeline works for you, and also whetting your appetite that you may want to explore more of this at a later time point. In 1981, we had our first female chair. It was Margaret Lang of Dow. And since that time, we've had 12 more female chairs in the 40 years of that span. So we are devoted to diversity and inclusion. We also gave our first Sterling Hendricks Award to the Nobel laureate, Norman Borlaug, in 1981 as well. In 1985, we had a name change. We were originally, again, the Division of Pesticides. We became the Division of Agrochemicals as we are today. And this was to broaden the coverage of what we cover, including pest control plus biotechnology. We also see that in 1985, we were giving a new Young Scientist Award was announced. And if you're aware, in our division today, we have a number of activities that really support early career scientists. We have a new investigator award, we have early career symposia, and we have student travel awards. And so again, here you see the beginnings of some really important pieces of our culture today. I want to highlight that in 1986, we had our first AGRO posters session. And this is a very important event again today. It's a well-attended, when we're face-to-face. We did have poster sessions virtually as well. And it was held in the spring of 1986. At that point in time, we were still programming at both the fall and the spring and national meetings, spring and fall national meetings. And that did change. After 2009, we consolidated to put all of our energy into one national meeting at ACS, and currently it's mostly the fall, but that's a change as well. The last thing that I want to do on this part of the timeline is show you that the first AGRO ACS book entitled Biotechnology and Agricultural Chemistry was published. Now, we have, since this time, had over 100 topical books that have published. And these are really invaluable resources. And what they do is they take the programming from our national meeting and they consolidate things into, I'm trying to get something to come up here and it's not doing it. Hold on one second. And it's not going to go. All right, never mind. Oh, there it is. Yes, so we have over 100 ACS collaborations where we take symposia that have been presented and they are collated and curated into books. I don't expect you to read all these titles. These are all to show that we have a long-standing set of books that are devoted to discovery and synthesis. We have examples of books that are dealing with water considerations and environmental fate. We have a number of things that are not only devoted to agriculture, but also pesticide use in urban environments. And the point of me flashing these things up is, again, not for you to read everything, but for you to see the really wide variety of topics that are covered under these ACS books that we partner with ACS to produce. And so I would encourage you, if you are interested on drilling down into a topic, you might want to check the AGRO Division website where we have all of these books listed, over 100 at this point. So you can go right here and you can find books. They're organized going backwards in time as well. So our last book was just published by Dave Barnico and Mike Krowski. So I'm going to go back to the timeline now. And I want to now indicate one last thing, and that is in 1989, we established a governance meeting. We used to have several meetings. We are governed at this point by the executive committee, which is voted in 3-year terms, elected officials, and standing committees. And in '89, we decided we were having too many meetings and there was a lot of overlap. And now, again, this is a long-standing tradition that on Sunday nights of face-to-face meetings, we have this combined governance meeting. I do want to give a shout out to all of the committees that give reports. We have 12. I'll just name a few. We have a communications, we have a finance, we have development, which means they're gathering sponsors. We have a very active international activities. We have 12 in all. And if you're looking to get engaged, this is a great way to join one of these committees. And the last reason for talking about this is because of the pandemic. In the last 2 meetings, we have delayed the governance meeting to be separate from the fall meeting. And tomorrow is the annual meeting for AGRO, and it is open to all members. And if you want to attend and haven't heard about it, you can contact our secretary, who is Sharon Snyder. Okay, so this is how the timeline works. I've given you some history on AGRO. There's more in there. I should also give a shout out to the picogram. We are now on our 99th volume of the picogram, and there's a great archive here. The picogram is our newsletter, and it collates all of our minutes, all of our announcements, all of our award winners, and it's a really great resource. And it's not archived back to volume 1, but you can look at volumes from the mid 2000s onward, and it's a really great resource. So again, it's archived here as well. For the last couple of minutes, I just want to bop out to these other areas. I have intentionally drilled down into the AGRO history because that's what I was asked to talk about. But we have collected milestones in other areas. If you're in the green bucket, you're going to see things about general industry and food production. If you're in the orange bucket, you're going to see things about regulation. So we definitely have in here the formation of FIFRA. We had FQPA, but we also have things in here like Dana mentioned cumulative. We have the updated screening approach for cumulative, which was published in 2016. So we have a number of things in here also about the EU and some of the things that they've brought forward in this time. In the purple area, we have specific products. Hopefully they're key products. Again, these milestones came from members. So it wasn't always our choice. It's what people told us they thought was very, very important. But we have things in here about certain products. I wanted to just highlight, let's see, 2008. This one has the first joint registration. So not only is it a specific product, but it's also the first time that we had an international agreement across Canada, the US, Australia, and Ireland to get a registration through on a global format. And then lastly, the other comments in here are things about technology and challenges, things like issues, or I think I just saw CRISPR fly past when CRISPR was elucidated. So in closing, I just hope that I have been able to demonstrate for you the resource that this is and encourage you to go take your own tour. And I wanted to end with just sharing our mission. We are committed to bringing together a worldwide community of scientists and stakeholders to advance knowledge and promote innovation solutions for the production of agricultural productivity, public health, and the environment. And so that is a glance of just where AGRO's been and where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. That is a very impressive history and timeline that I've seen so far. And now, Kent, I'll give the floor to you.
All right, AGRO, what a wonderful division it is. And I must say that having joined the division back in the mid 1980s, I found it a great place to be involved as a professional, engaging in the science and educational and regulatory topics of our field. And what I'd like to do now is just give a very brief sort of a commercial, if you will, regarding our AGRO 50th celebration. And I'm speaking here on behalf of both myself and Jeanette Van Emmen. We've been serving as the AGRO 50th co-chairs for the last couple of years. And again, this is going to be sort of a one-slide snapshot of what has begun and what will continue with the celebration that we're enjoying. First, again, thanks to Cheryl and her team that have worked on this agro-historical timeline. This was the work on the AGRO 50th celebration that we began and kicked off in 2020 in association with the virtual San Francisco meeting. What a great contribution that is, that the interactive style, the variety of historical events that are captured in that timeline are going to make that a really valuable reference for years to come. So please avail yourself of that work product that I think will be a living one and will continue to evolve and capture key developments in our illustrious history and our exciting future. So that's been a great start. Now, as Cheryl mentioned, we initially planned in 2020 to be all together in San Francisco, which is, I guess, one of the most glorious locations that the ACS meets in. And we were scuttled by that COVID pandemic for meeting in person. And so we have continued through the virtual meetings of the last couple of years, and we'll do some next year to have some AGRO 50 events, but we're really holding our powder for the 2023 fall ACS meeting in, where else? San Francisco. So as ACS goes back to San Francisco in the fall of 2023, we're going to pull out all the plugs and engage fully in the activities around the 50 and beyond celebration. So we've kind of expanded the brand name there. It's not just the AGRO 50th celebration, but 50th and beyond. What's going to be happening there that you can put on your calendar and plan to participate in? We're going to have a wonderful symposium focused around sustainable agriculture, public health protection, where we'll have a number of distinguished speakers reflecting on key developments and evolution of our science, of the regulation of the activities, of education, and also opportunities the future holds. So you're not going to want to miss that symposium, which will immediately be followed by a gala reception where we'll have attendees by agro legends. We're going to try to gather as many of the old timers as possible to be present and recognized. We'll have some ACS VIPs. There'll be awards and recognition, historical displays, and a whole lot more. And of course, food and drink. We've got a number of table sponsors already identified, and there's additional table sponsorships available. Each table sponsor will, again, develop a historical display of how their organization has contributed to the science of agrochemistry over the years. And finally, not to be left out, by meeting in that San Francisco area, we'll be planning again for a full-day agricultural field tour that will be immediately following on the Friday of the meeting week. And it's going to be an educational adventure because not only the San Francisco Bay Area, but we've got the nearby Sacramento Valley, University of California, Davis. That is going to be a wonderful treat. And so plan now to participate in our fall 2023 AGRO 50 and beyond activities. There'll be opportunities coming up for involvement and contributions. Watch the picogram, watch our AGRO e-newsletter, and of course the AGRO website. And we look forward to welcoming and fully participating, hopefully by that time, knock on wood, in person in San Francisco. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ken. That is really an exciting celebration plan and also a great place to have that celebration. Great. So we do have a question here in the Q&A. How soon after the annual meetings are the abstracts available at the AGRO site?
Abstracts are usually published before the annual meeting, so I'm not sure what this is asking for. The picogram has a call for papers in the spring and has the program in the fall. I'm not sure the full abstract is always published or not. I can't recall. Maybe somebody else can say.
Thanks, Cheryl. Another question is, how many members are registered in the agrochemical division?
I do have the answer to that. The recent head count was 1,077, but before the pandemic, we were approximately 1,250. That was about the norm. We do believe that we've lost a few members over the virtual season that we've had for a virtual meeting for 2 years.
Thank you, Cheryl. So I see that we have a couple more minutes and I don't have question for the AGRO session. So maybe I can go back to the question for Dana, if Dana is still available.
I am still here.
Perfect. Okay, Dana, I see a question in the chat that I didn't see before. So there is a question on, great presentation. Please share further information on biopesticides approval process. How difficult or easy to get registration given the complex biological processes involved?
Okay, so I will, if you give me your contact information, I can refer you to the director, the acting director of the Biopesticides Division, who is Charles Smith, or as we refer to him, Billy Smith, who will be able to provide you with that information. I myself don't handle biopesticides, and I don't want to steer you in the wrong direction. It would probably be better to have a conversation directly with the Biopesticides Division, which they do all the time. So that won't be a problem at all. But if I can get your contact information, I will pass it along.
Thanks. Yeah. So whoever that person is, please contact Dana. Another question is, does the EPA intend to make any changes or further enforcement on kill claims of devices?
Okay, so this one, it would be directed toward the antimicrobials division. So Anita Pease is their director, and she would probably be best to answer that. I know there are discussions ongoing on this topic. It's a very important topic, but again, I would want you to talk to the antimicrobial division specifically because it's kind of an emerging topic.
Yeah. The next question is, please provide chlorpyrifos and alternatives update.
So I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. Chlorpyrifos is quite, there's a lot going on with chlorpyrifos right now. I would suggest probably contacting the chemical review manager in the pesticide reevaluation division, or you can send me an email and I can direct your specific question to them as the risk managers. Like I said, I think just given where things are currently with chlorpyrifos, I think that's the better approach for that question.
Thank you. Last question. You mentioned environmental justice and incorporating environmental justice into OPP's program. Can you mention some possible impacts on pesticide and biopesticide reviews?
So what I can tell you is, so we in the Office of Pesticide Programs, we already do incorporate some environmental justice initiatives into the work that we do, especially in the Health Effects Division. We have a long list of what we currently do. In the past, we've done trainings. We think about specific vulnerable populations when we have available data, and we've done quantitative assessments in the past. Right now, what we're doing within OCSPP and probably across EPA overall is really coming up with the work plan of what will be done to further environmental justice within the context of our risk assessments, or again, across the agency. So I can't point you to anything specific right now because that work plan is really being developed. But it, as you know, this is an executive order of President Biden, so it is a focus. So there will be projects that we work on. I can't tell you right now the direct impact they may or may not have on conventional pesticides, because in my mind, we're really in the early stages of seeing what comes next and what work we're going to do in this area.
Thank you. So we are at the top of the hour now. I would like to thank you so much to all great presenters today, and also to the audience for your participation. Thank you for your attention, and we'll see you next time.